Hi, and welcome to Street Fight Politics. We're happy to have you back. I'm Jimmy Zuma. It's Street Fight Politics because when you turn the other cheek, you just get punched in it. And tonight we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things, among them new demographics for voters. And so let me introduce my guests. First, there's Harry Ramsbottom, well-known military member, national security, part of national security team, a historian about military issues, and a hell of a nice guy. Hi, Harry.
Hello. Good to be here.
And our other co-host is Ed Westerfield. Ed is kind of our local historian here. He keeps things together. He's an entrepreneur, physician, owns a bar, which I just love to mention. And he's an all-around, our business guy. And I'm a reporter based in Washington, D.C., and I do this and another show, Wait What Politics with Zuma and Steele with Senator Victoria Steele. We're happy to have you back. And Ed, take it away.
Hey, I just want to welcome the audience here. I'm talking because I am genuinely mad. I am angry about a political issue that like I've never been angry before, and that's over the Amy Coney Barrett debacle, taking her and ramming her through literally 8 days before an election for the sole purpose of trying to ensure that if Trump is going to try to steal the election, he has his Confederates there to do it for him. This just has to have a response, and that leads to my second issue of who I'm angry at, and that's the Democrats. I used to be a Republican, now an apostate, been a Democrat for 4 years now, given Democratic candidates my money. And every time I talk to a candidate, I come back and ask them, are you going to be willing to fight? And I mean, I'm not asking you to get in and physically fight, but if somebody tries to take a verbal swing at you, can you take a swing back? And the thing I have seen and observed time and time again is that they have this attitude that, no, we aren't going to descend to their level. And, we don't do that. And as Jimmy alluded, you keep getting punched in the face, and eventually the voters notice that you won't fight back. So they take it as that, well, those guys punching you must know something. And this is the time that it's for the Democrats to finally stand up and go full mad dog on the opposition. It's beyond doing tit for tat. Tit for tat is what little kids do. This has got to be full nuclear destruction, because the only thing that's going to get the Republicans' attention is going in and literally doing everything you can to destroy them. And if you're not going to do that, we have just cemented in a probably, at least 20-year conservative majority at all levels of the court, really, that basically that's the rest of my lifetime. And I am not willing to live the rest of my lifetime, which hopefully is a really long time, by the way. So, and, there are ways to get around this, but the Democrats, it's like AOC today was saying, they don't think we have the stones to do this. AOC's generation, I know they've got the stones to do it. They're itching to do it. It's my generation that are the corporatists that, we don't want to get any, get in a fight for anybody because it's just, you get messy. Well, you know what?
Yeah,
sometimes you have to get messy.
I'm not sure it's completely that, though, Ed. Part of it is there needs to be a demographic shift in the party, because the party has always frowned on fighting dirty, and voters don't like it when a candidate goes to a debate and fights dirty. The Democrats don't like that. Republicans love that because they're the party of dirty fighters, liars, cheats, and thieves. So they love that kind of stuff. But among Democrats, it requires a real shift in thinking. And I would say, I would say that's happening. I see it happening. It's going to happen because of demographics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's also happening because people are realizing that you can't have peace unless you're willing to fight for it. You can't just be peaceful and expect people to catch up with you.
I want to add an element to that as well, though. I mean, two of the three of us on this screen were raised as Republicans and were converted in the recent years. And there's a part of me that still very much wants to scrap it up with those guys and literally take it to the streets. And I don't shy away at all from being confrontational. As we discussed last week, I got thrown off Facebook for a while because I got confrontational, and I'll probably be thrown off again, but that's okay. I am not going to take the shit that these people are handing out and just let it roll over me. That's not where I am. That's not where I came from, and that's not where I'm going to go.
You know, I want to take that thought and take it just a step further. The fact that you haven't fought back has made it so that you have these rolling caravans, going down, interstates everywhere that are out looking for a fight. I mean, literally, they're looking for a fight. And it's, it's like we had an incident here in Phoenix where it was, it would have just taken one guy to start waving a gun around, and all of a sudden, you've got Mad Max on the 101 in Phoenix. And that's something we'll talk about, with Mike's segment later on. But, I keep thinking we're going to skirt by and we're not going to have a major level of violence after this. But, it's going it's not going to take much to throw a spark out there that ignites something that very quickly no one can control.
Well, so where do you draw the line in your active advocacy between that point where you don't want to get to and the point you do want to get to? There's the old Democratic Party where everybody was genteel, and that's what voters wanted. And to some degree, moderate Democrats still want that. There's the new Democratic Party that's willing to fight and scrap and is really looking at a change in tactics come this next election. And then there's things going overboard, descending into civil war. So how do you pick how far to go?
I think we're actually seeing it happen, very genuinely, very holistically. And you're right. It has everything to do with this demographic shift, and whether it's old Republicans like me and Ed, or whether it's new Democrats like my kids in their 20s who are coming up and just aren't taking it anymore and aren't going to take it anymore. I think it stops at the line of physicality, but I think it goes up to that point where you can actually, yell and scream and say, I'm not taking this shit anymore. We're done with it. We are not going to listen to you lie in public and not call you out on it.
Well, it's clear that what we've done the last 40 or 50 years hasn't worked. We've been making steady backward progress from the New Deal to this moment. And we're at a time when, a lot of people have better legal lives, better rights than they had before, but they're harder and harder to express. And it's easier and easier for racists, for example, to interfere with Black people's lives to the point of killing them.
Last week I really got a disheartening text from my daughter, who we talked a tiny bit about last week, the one who's in the feminist Air Force. and she cast her vote today in Salt Lake City, Utah. She obviously did it by mail, did it in advance. And she said she thought she was going to feel good about it, but she didn't. And she didn't, when I pressed her on it, she didn't, because she felt badly for all the people who have been prevented and are being prevented from casting their votes. And, how do you deal with a kid? And I say kid, she's a young woman now. She'll be past the age of 25 shortly. How
she doesn't care about how old you say she is. She's
well,
not like a prior generation.
No, she
could care less.
She really doesn't. But the reality is that this generation that's coming up, they aren't taking it. They are feeling it. They're internalizing it. And A, I think that's great. But B, in the meantime, we've got to do something to give them something to sink their teeth into. And I think the days of the Democratic Party saying, oh, well, we can't be that rude, we can't be that awful. No, we need to be a little bit that awful, just a tiny bit.
Again, to take that, you also have to look at the institutions that wield power, the police, the fire department. And you're going to have to make major changes in them. We're not going to defund it. I mean, we need the police, we need the fire department, but you've had a takeover of these institutions by far right-wing forces. I mean, it's like you look and see where the Oath Keepers are coming from, the 3%ers, some of the Proud Boys, and they're actively recruiting them, out of police forces. And
Well, and the Oath Keepers are retired cops. Those redneck assholes are retired cops. So it's a full circle thing that's going on with them. Not only are they recruiting in the military, especially, and coming out of the military to join the police force, but then they're retiring out of the police force and going back to being a menace to people who don't agree with them, and threatening them and doing all that stuff. Oath Keepers were, when the Bundy Ranch got taken over, Oath Keepers were there for a while, and they basically got afraid of the other people that were there and made an excuse for leaving, like there was too much drinking going on. But the fact is, the other people scared the shit out of them, and they went home with their tail between their legs, which is kind of what they do. They go, they make a big noise, and then they slink home. But, back to the business of government, we're in the business of trying to run a democracy when one party is liars, cheats, and thieves. And, you've heard me say it half a dozen times, I know, on this show alone. We need to destroy the Republican Party. Whoever picks up the pieces and wants to replace it with something else, that's fine. But the Republican Party itself is a criminal enterprise.
I think you're seeing them destroy themselves right now, realistically. When you see the Lincoln Project, when you see all the people ditching the Republican Party, when you see the senators now, even the hardcore Republican senators, distancing themselves from Trump, you're really watching the wheels come off of this political movement that started, in 1850. And I don't know what it's going to look like moving forward, but it's going to be a completely different thing in 10 years or so from now, I think.
Well,
Doesn't matter. It'll always have its roots in criminal, anti-citizen behavior. It needs to not survive that. That's my opinion. It needs to not survive its criminal phase. It's voter suppression phase. It's racism phase.
They've already run me and Mike out of the party and anybody that's like us. So, that's happened over the last, 10 years. You're seeing the Lincoln Project guys, those guys will never, ever work in Republican politics ever again. From that standpoint, a guy like Steve Schmidt, who is, that's how he makes his living. He's not going to be making a living off of Republican candidates ever again. And so for him to do that just shows the commitment that he's made to getting Trump and, seeing the same things we do, that they need to be taken out, and you need to destroy what's there. And I don't know what you replace it with, because, it's like the old saw is, America needs a center-right political party.
Why?
What does that mean? Yeah, it's like, what does that mean?
I agree with that. Why? Who the hell is that? What are they going to do?
Yeah, balance is not the goal. Our goal needs to be to defeat them, not to restore balance with them. There's no common ground with racists. There's no common ground with people who will overlook child kidnapping. There's no common ground. So there's no place to meet in the middle.
There was a great segment on All Things Considered tonight. I think it was All Things Considered. It was on NPR, that was talking about the numbers of people on both sides of the political divide who are ditching old relationships, 30, 40 years, lifetime friendships, etc., even family members. I can tell you I've done that. I
have too.
And the whole point is not because I just disagree with their politics. I disagree with their basic values. I don't want to be
morality.
I don't want to be associated with people who think and act that way, who literally believe the opposite of what I do in these things. And it's not just whether they think, we should be left or right, or the sky is blue or green. It literally is, how do you treat other people? What is fair? All those basic things about how you just get along in life. And they clearly are not there. They're not where I am. So, I'm ditching them.
I've been terming it recalibrating friendships. And there's been some pretty big recalibration going on. Yeah, and I mean, it's like I agree. I mean, I've had some childhood friends that are no longer friends.
Yeah.
People back from college that it's like I used to. There's one of my roommates. It's like we've been going back and forth, and it's like I don't remember you being like this 40 years ago.
Right.
It's like what happened in the intervening time to get you to where you are now, that you're okay, like Jimmy says, with kids in cages and cops shooting black people, like it's a sport. I have no overlap with that, and that's one of the main reasons I left the Republican Party is, I looked at the people that were in the party, and it's like, I'm nothing like you. I don't want to be anything like you. So why am I here? And I couldn't change them. They didn't want to be changed, so I left.
Well, and the other thing is that party has been shrinking. It's shrinking and shrinking. You guys helped to shrink it. It doesn't win elections fairly anymore, except in, like Mississippi, and probably not even there. It doesn't win elections fairly anymore. It wins elections by cheating. And our goal ought to be to eliminate the cheating. If we eliminate the cheating, we eliminate the problem.
It hasn't won a fair election realistically since before 2000.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. I think the last one they won, for lack of a better word, fairly was probably Reagan.
Yeah.
It's
well, and even that, he was running a Southern strategy of racial dog whistles that the party runs until today. Lee Atwater talked about that when he was dying of cancer. He,
deathbed confession that
his deathbed morality rose up, and he admitted that that's what they were doing all along. They were trying to get white people to vote against black people. They're still doing that.
Yeah, more blatantly.
Right.
Oh, they're not even attempting to hide it. There's no dog whistling. This is dog yelling now. So, it's very overt. Having grown up in the South, it's, this is like my next door neighbor, Peanut, back in Decatur, Alabama, who, if I saw him, he seemed like a nice guy, but if you get in a conversation with him, he would let you know where he stands on matters of race. So,
right.
No problem.
And not think twice about it.
No,
it's not even.
That's just who he was.
It never crossed his mind that you might not also be a racist. That's the thing.
Yeah, when I was a kid growing up in the South as well, the N word was considered slightly naughty by nice people. Everybody else used it at will all the time, not even thinking twice about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where we are. The problem for us now is the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And we're not going to fix the broken election system without a Supreme Court that is ruling based on justice, not just on which party they came from or what ideological group they came from. 3 of the 4 justices on the Supreme Court today were people that worked in they were lawyers for Bush v. Gore when they were trying to overturn that election in Florida and stop the counting, and they subsequently did. So we know how they're going to vote if they get a chance to vote on this election. They're going to vote to cheat.
Well, to skip ahead, if that happens, I think that the chance of having a mass uprising after that is almost 100%.
Yeah. You've actually seen Kavanaugh today give signals that he would be open to that. We saw in their decision about limiting the vote in Wisconsin, limiting the time that they could count those votes if they came in late. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh willing to limit the right of states to interpret their own laws. Now, this has been a construct we've had since the beginning of the Constitution, where state laws were left open to the states to determine, and as long as they didn't abrogate U.S. Constitution, they could do that. Well, today the Supreme Court basically said no, and they reversed their own decision from a few years back, and are allowing or limiting the states to determine their own way ahead. Now, that's interesting for a Republican court to do, because we've always been states' rights. right?
If you look at these election rulings, they're ruling both ways. They're ruling for states when it helps Republicans, and they're ruling against states when it helps Republicans. So
True.
this is absolutely a partisan court. It's just as dishonest as the rest of the Republican Party. And we shouldn't be pretending that this is a court based on justice. This is a court based on raw power seeking, raw attempt to keep the Republicans in power long past their sell-by date.
Well,
It's
we
all
said
part of the same criminal conspiracy.
We said last week, and I still agree with this, the only logical response for the Republican Party, or excuse me, from the Democratic Party to this is to pack the court. And it's not unconstitutional. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing that we shouldn't and haven't done in the past. We've changed the size of the court multiple times in our history. This is the way ahead, and I think it's a smart way ahead.
No, we're having to make this response because the court is already packed. What we're going to do is we're going to expand the size of the court so that you can bring it back into some type of balance. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, push it way to the side on the left, because when you go really analyze the history of our politics in this country, there's been very few times where you've actually had progressives, with any of the levers of power. It's like pretty much FDR was it. And,
Right.
Once you get past him, Kennedy, tried to live off of that legacy, but he wasn't. He was a centrist. Same thing with Carter. It's like, and, Bill Clinton, was the master of triangulation. So, it's like we haven't had that in, we're coming up on 80 years now.
Well, so the thing that I think our fellow Democrats and the rest of America need to understand is to get to the point where we can restore that balance, the Senate is going to have to be strongly encouraged to get rid of the filibuster. It's not a constitutional thing. There's nothing sacred about a filibuster. It was just a rule that the Senate developed over 200 years to allow them to do business. But we've now come to the point where they can't do business because that filibuster keeps them from actually passing meaningful legislation. When this new Senate comes in, and I'm very optimistic that we will have a Democratic Senate, they need to be able to overturn the filibuster rule to get to just a simple majority vote.
Right.
And at that point, they can, if they desire to do it, increase the size of the Supreme Court.
Well, and it's really a fake filibuster.
It is.
I mean, the reason it stops progress is because it's not a real filibuster. A real filibuster, you have to keep talking the whole time. You have to keep the mic, keep the podium, and that's how you filibuster. Well, none of these lazy fat guys are going to do that. So they've created this fake filibuster where all they have to do is say, "I'm going to filibuster this," and all work stops on it. That's not a real filibuster. We could keep a real filibuster and just get rid of the fake one if we wanted to. That's one thing we could do.
I'm all for that. I want to see Ted Cruz up there not taking a piss for 20 hours straight.
He's been taking a piss quite frequently lately. Yeah, so that's step one. Get rid of the filibuster. We need to reconfigure the court in a way that prevents it from being a partisan grab. And the way we do that is my SCOTUS 21 proposal that you've heard me talk about. Increase the size of the number of justices to 21, devote 5 to each case, randomly selected, not chosen by the Republican Chief Justice. And they'll decide those cases. And then the rest of the Supreme Court will have an opportunity to want to take an en banc review, like in the lower courts, where the entire court decides to hear that and make a decision based on it. And at that point, there are too many justices. There are too many different ages, too many different philosophies, too many different for the court to be a partisan enterprise.
I think that has a lot of merit. I really do. And, I've been thinking about it since you brought it up to me over, just conversation a couple of weeks ago. The more I think about it, the more it makes a lot of sense. And why not? Really, truly, why not?
So SCOTUS 21, talk to your friends about it. See what they say.
I have been. I love the idea. But it still comes down to one fundamental fact. The Democrats have to be willing to fight. And if they need to fight dirty. They need to fight hard. They need to fight to win. You know,
Are you
Right.
saying it needs to be a street fight?
absolutely.
Well, let's move on a little bit and talk about the fighters in the Democratic Party, because
Amen.
we have a whole new generation coming up, and they have arrived. You know, if you look at millennials and Gen Z, those combined generations, they are more than half of the nation's current population. Now, they're not all voting age yet, but this is why we say we have to deliver this election to the next generation, and then the next generation will take care of themselves. Because as they become regular voters, you know, the way this works is when you're young, you don't vote. You don't vote. You don't vote. You can't get around to it. You're too busy. You're doing something else. But once you vote, you become a lifelong voter. Once you walk into that booth and cast those numbers, you are unlikely to miss an election after that. So the act of voting changes things. Now, if they're 50% of the population, they are probably less than that. They're 10 or 20% of the voting age, but they are voting like crazy in early balloting.
Yeah.
They're 4 times the level that they've done before. For example, in 750,000 18 to 29 voters in early voters in Texas versus 100,000 in years past. Almost 500,000 in Florida versus 130,000 in the last election. And I could go on from there. Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan, we're all seeing record turnout among the youngest voters, 18 to 29.
I think it's fantastic. It's the most optimistic thing I've seen in 4 years. It's
right.
amazing how strongly they're coming out and what they're doing. And I can't say enough good about it.
Right. 1 in 4 people that age have been to a protest. Well, that's really a lot more than we had in the 70s. We had a smaller group in the 70s than we have now. And I've been saying this generation in terms of their values is most like the 70s since the 70s. You know, they believe in the environment. They believe in immigration reform. They believe government is there to solve problems. They want criminal justice reform. Their big issue is the environment, but they also care about the role of government. They want government doing things, providing services. They want to get something back for the taxes they pay. Now, we have a whole country that a lot of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people have been duped into believing they should get nothing back for their taxes. This is not that group. This group wants value for money. They want change, and they're willing to hit the streets to do it. You know, we saw that with the Black Lives Matter protests and the idea that they were going to crack down and the police were going to handle it and all that stuff. Well, a dedicated group of people, citizens, can wear down and wear out any police department in the country. And that, of course, includes the Department of Homeland Security, which, tried to do something in Portland and utterly failed. So you take this younger generation, you get them voting. We don't have to worry about this anymore. This is the last election. If we win this election, it's the last one we have to worry about. And it looks like we're going to win.
Go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was going to say, historically, this generation of protesters is fundamentally different from the protesters of the Vietnam War in the late 60s, early 70s. You go back and look at the late 60s and 70s, those were primarily upper middle class kids who had, daddy's credit card, or, I probably didn't have credit cards back then.
Yeah, you didn't need a credit card to go to college then.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of those folks were people who fought in Vietnam. They were going on the GI Bill.
Yeah.
And they were involved in
the point
protesting.
being is this group that's today's group is, broader in every respect. It's black, white, brown, every income level, and primarily these are people that haven't been in the military. It's like right now we've got 3 to 5% of the population is really, joining voluntarily now, as opposed to, every male of age being at risk for the draft in 1967. So,
right through 1973 when I missed the draft by mere months. So
yeah, so did I.
I was that first year that didn't have a chance to get drafted, and boy, were we happy. That was when lottery day came in the 70s, that was a dark day, and everybody worried about getting
I was
their
the
number.
last year to get a lottery number.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay, guys. I took it in the pants for you.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it. So let's talk about that demographic shift. It's always been 80% white people for a really long time since black people got voting rights. It's been 80 to 85% white people casting ballots. Now, for the 2020 election, we're looking at black people being about 13%, Hispanics being about 14%, Asians being about 5%. The total of white people gets down to about 66% from its high of everyone being white prior to the right to vote. And that's going to continue to decline fast because, again, Gen Z, more than 50% people of color.
And it's not just people of color; it's mixed race as well. I mean, it really is. We're becoming that melting pot that we talked about damn near 100 years ago, where it just really doesn't matter. Where even questions that we have taken for granted, us three old bastards, filled out just without even thinking, are you white, Caucasian, whatever it was, those are becoming completely irrelevant now.
Well, my kids get to check off 2 or more now. So
right,
yeah.
and mother's Hispanic, I'm white.
They've always been irrelevant too, and we just didn't figure that out.
Right.
But I think this next generation is the generation that's really going to take the country back and be a democracy. And we have to set the stage for them to do it. We have to win the election. We have to clean up the Supreme Court. We have to make sure that cops stop killing people. We have to provide some services to this group. And then once they're in power, which will be the next presidential election, all we have to do is sit back and follow their lead. Our battle is over. Their battle is just beginning.
Yeah. At least we're giving them, we'll find out here in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, but I think we're giving them that launching pad to do that from. And you're right. I think the next election, 2024, is going to look radically different than maybe anything we've ever experienced. And I mean that in a good way.
Right. Right. Well, it's a restoration of the kind of politics when the nation was hopeful. It wasn't always great in the 50s, but the nation as a whole was hopeful at that time and moving forward and trying to take care of poor people. Now we do just the opposite. We need to get that back, but better.
Yeah.
We need to get that back in a multicultural way, not just a white people way. And if we can do that, the country can begin moving forward again, and we can stop defending against moving backwards. So we're depending on you, 18 to 29-year-olds. Get out there. If you vote in the numbers that you've been early voting on election day, this thing is going to be a blowout.
I think
it's looking like that's entirely possible now.
I completely agree. Back in my old job, we talked about indicators and warnings when we were looking at the battlefield and what was happening. And, it was simple things like, is the enemy moving things up to the front? Are they preparing? Does they look like they're preparing to attack here or there or whatever? What I'm seeing now, though, indicators and warnings, it does look like it could very much be a landslide. I'm not going to go there and say it's going to be, but all of the things that need to be in place for that to happen seem to be happening. We've already blown the doors off the numbers of people who have early voted or sent in their ballots early. That record numbers we've never seen before. And the reality is when there is, and I would say this if I was Republican, when there is early voting, when there are not large number of voters coming to the polls, it usually means a Democratic win.
Well, it's been like that for decades.
That's just numbers. That's math.
The Republican Party, that was the mantra.
Yeah.
It's like if there's a large turnout, we're in trouble. So, what are you going to do?
When everybody votes, we always win.
Yeah.
When enthusiasm is high, we always win. When turnout is high, Democrats always win. That's all it takes.
And you're not going to hear me say this too much, but God bless Donald Trump for pissing so many people off and getting them out to vote.
Speaking of being pissed off, I was out in Sun City, Arizona over the weekend, which is the where the old people go to God's waiting room, and and it's historically been a very conservative Republican area. And so I had the opportunity to go over there, and I was driving through some neighborhoods, and I was shocked to see the number of Biden Harris signs that were very neatly placed in the front yard because they've got very powerful HOAs, and you can only do so much. But it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row, and it's like then I'd see a Trump sign, and it was defaced. I mean, it was like, there was an FU on a Trump sign in Sun City.
Oh, those poor little snowflakes. They had to go get a new sign.
Yeah, some
Well-
80-year-old guy got that pissed off.
Walked over there with his walker and pulled a magic marker out of his basket.
But again, I mean, it's like you're looking around, and it's like, if things are that much in flux, I'm starting to think that, this could be, the 40 plus state blowout, and, we pick up 10 to 12 seats in the Senate.
I think I'm not going to say 10 to 12, but I'm going to say I think 5 is a realistic number for the Senate for us to pick up.
And I think that there's a good chance that will happen. I also think there's a good chance that the numbers will be so high that even a partisan Supreme Court won't dare to overturn them.
I think that's actually really the point. If the numbers are that high, it's going to be a lot quicker decision.
Right. But if the Republicans steal another election and they steal it for Trump, I'm predicting, and I want to leave you with this, capitalism will be the casualty of that. Capitalism will not survive another dishonest election in this country.
I think that's entirely possible. We have all of the elements are already being collected for a revolution. And again, this isn't Republican or Democrat. This is just looking at history, looking at what's there, looking at past revolutions. When you have this level of discontent down below and this disparity between the top and the bottom, that's what happened in Russia in 1917. That's what's happened in France. I mean, this is what happens, or this is what creates all of the pressure and the heat and the intensity that leads to that kind of thing.
Right.
So let's talk about what we might see on election night.
Okay.
Because, the reality is over time, over the past, most of our adult lives, most of our lives, us three and the audience as voters, we've been used to having some pundit call it at midnight or so and say, well, it looks like, so-and-so. And then there's a concession speech at 2 or 3 in the morning, like there was 4 years ago. And that's usually because there has been enough of a track record for the people to go back and look at the numbers of votes coming in from the various districts across a particular state or the key states that were out there to be able to call that. I'm not sure we're going to have that this year. I really, unless, as we hope, there is a landslide and you see Florida called early and you see Pennsylvania called early, Texas called early, the Rust Belt called early. Unless that happens, it could be a while. And I'm sad to say that, my kids who are very attuned to this and actually listen to this show, watch this show, they don't remember the year 2000. They don't remember the agony of the Florida recount, even though we lived in Florida at the time. It could very much be that. And for all of you old bastards like us who think back to that, remember, it was weeks before we knew who was going to be our president. And it did take a Supreme Court decision to hand that to the Republicans, sadly.
Well, it didn't take that. That's what they did. That's an example of the criminal avarice they bring to the voting rights. They are, voter suppression is the name of their game, and that's a crime.
Well, what adds to this is the fact all those things that we just, applauded with the early voting, the mail-in voting, et cetera, means this election is going to functionally and mechanically look unlike any we've ever had. We just don't know how they're going to handle that. Places like Texas and Pennsylvania, 2 huge states with lots and lots of electoral votes, don't even begin to open those ballots until Election Day. So how are they going to physically handle that mass of new stuff and new functionality? We'll see.
I think that you may not call it that, on the 3rd, but I think that North Carolina and Florida will give you a pretty good indication of where things are going. So,
yeah, I actually think the election will be decided before the results are in Florida. They have such a history of running poor elections and not being able to count their votes, and voter suppression and ballot boxes getting lost. I mean, they really are electorally incompetent in Florida. So my opinion is,
I'm a Floridian, by the way.
Yes. Well, then
I do.
I don't think we'll have results from Florida before we know who the president is. Before we know the president is Joe Biden, and he'll ultimately win Florida, maybe, but it won't be the deciding factor. He doesn't need Florida to win. He needs Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Those are the states to watch.
So, having said that, I don't know if you all are aware, but the news flash today was that Trump campaign has pulled all the funding for advertisements in Florida. They've given up on Florida.
Wow.
Yes.
And they're running really close in Florida. So that's really saying something.
Well, that tells you that their internal polls, the ones you actually believe, the numbers aren't good.
Yeah, they're shifting their funding to exactly those other states, Jim. Pennsylvania, Michigan, et cetera, Ohio.
Or maybe after Trump got his cut, they don't have any money. Near as I could tell, Trump takes about 25% of everything that's money's collected for.
Well, he's gonna need it for his retirement in Saudi Arabia.
They only had $66 million at the beginning of this month.
Yeah.
You take 25% off of that, you can't run ads in a state like Florida. There's just not enough money.
Yeah, it's there are, again, indicators and warnings. There are lots of signs out there that everyone knows where this is going. We've seen McConnell talk about, his last Hail Mary ditch at getting Amy Coney Barrett into the Supreme Court, because this is his last hurrah. He won't be able to do that in a couple of months.
Right. That guy's dying from the hands in.
That's a really good question, because we've been debating that at the hospital lounges, what's going on with him. And, I'm assuming the pictures are not doctored when you see his hands. But
they've confirmed they're not doctored. Those are real.
Holy smoke, that is really bad. I mean,
yeah.
He's on some type of blood thinners, and he's on to get something like that, you're on heroic doses of the stuff. So why, so the question is why?
I think when he disappeared from you, he was busy having a heart attack.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, enough about Mitch McConnell. He's going to be history after next week. We urge you to go to the polls. We urge you to vote. If you haven't voted yet, please drop off your ballot in person or vote in person. It's too late to depend on the post office. Now, my wife FedExed my ballot to me here in Arizona. I'm going to FedEx it back to her tomorrow, and she's going to put it right in the Dropbox. And that's, it's worth the $120 it takes to send a 2-day package to Arizona.
That's almost as much as Republicans pay for a vote.
That's right. So make sure you vote. And then when you're done voting, if you vote on election day, hang around the polls and see what's going on. Hang around the polls and escort people in. Hang around the polls and form groups of people who will be there to offset some of the shenanigans that we're going to see going on. That's what I'll be doing. And I hope that's what you'll be doing too. So for Street Fight Politics, and for Ed, and for Harry, and for me, Jimmy Zuma, thank you, and we hope to see you again next week on Election Day.
Well,
indeed.
We'll be live for election night. Let's just go one further. So
and 1 hour later, we're gonna kick it off at 9:00 Eastern, so we can watch the polls close.
And basically, we're going to be sitting here dealing out punditry, and hopefully you tune in, send us questions, and let's all have a chat and see what comes up. It should be a phenomenal night. Not one of us is going to forget.
And we hope to have some good stories from the polling places for you. So we'll be able to give you a sense of what's going on in the election. We'll be able to celebrate with you if things are looking really good. And we hope that you'll come back and join us at Street Fight Politics.
Good night, everyone.